So we're the advocacy team at OCD Action, and here's Gary. The essentials. So we have, at OCD Action, been providing people with advocacy support now for about 7 years in total. So we have taken our knowledge and experience and produced this toolkit, which is very much a work in progress. We very much want people to use it and to tell us how useful it's been and what additions and changes we might make to it, because we want it to be something that you can use and that is useful to you. So that's what we're going to be talking through today. And we'll look at some scenarios, so you've got an example of how to put it into practice, and then, as I say, we'll have some questions at the end. So what is self-advocacy? Well, self-advocacy is speaking up for yourself to get what you want or need. As I say, we provide advocacy support to people, but many people don't feel that they need an advocate. They just need a bit of a map, I suppose, and a sense of directions as to how to go about accessing treatment or managing situations at work or at university. And this is a tool to support you to do that yourself. So if you have a look at your toolkit, sorry, something funny's gone on my screen. I don't know what to do with it. Do I get rid of that? I don't know, it's asking me to talk to it.
Don't have a clue why it's doing that.
That's it, yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. So if you look at the toolkit, it starts with action planning. So it's developing a strategy, looking at what do you want and how are you going to get it. So the first step is identifying the problem. What is it that you want to resolve? What's the issue? What would the goal look like? What do you want to happen? What do you want at the end? I mean, this all, is fairly straightforward and obvious, but it's trying to break it down so that you're looking at your issues more strategically. What information do you need? What do you need to know in order to make a plan? For example, if you're trying to access treatment, you need to know the mental health system. You need to have some understanding of where you'll get treatment from, who can provide it. And if you don't know what those steps are, it's about where can you get support to find out about that information. So, for example, you might come to OCD Action, you might look at the website, you might talk to the helpline. Then who's the decision maker? Who can make the referral? Who can provide you with treatment? How do you get to the person who can provide you with treatment? And in the toolkit, we've got a planning worksheet. So this can be used, although this toolkit initially is for accessing treatment, this kind of planning tool you can use for any issue that you might be struggling with. And it's a way of just breaking it down into steps that makes it easier. Because sometimes situations in life seem quite overwhelming. And so to be breaking it down to how we might approach things, the aim is to make it easier for you. And then the toolkit looks at the essential advocacy skills that you need in order to achieve what it is that you want. And key to that is communication skills. How best to get your voice heard. So in the toolkit, we've got information about preparing for meetings or appointments. Lots of the time people come to us and they I was at a support group last week actually, and somebody was saying that they'd had 3 phone calls from 3 different people and they were now on a waiting list. But they didn't know who they'd spoken to, they didn't know what organisation they were from, and they didn't know what they were waiting for on the waiting, what they were on the waiting list for. And the toolkit, using the worksheets that are in it, is reminding you, I suppose, to ask for that information, to record that information, to write it down. Who are you speaking to? What are they promising you? Where are they from? What are the waiting times? What are you waiting for? So you've got all that information. So you're a bit more in control of the waiting for treatment and the process. So we've got worksheets on how to prepare for meetings and appointments, recording what goes on in meetings and appointments. So making notes of who was at the meeting, what was promised, what decisions were made. Similarly with letters, I mean, one of the top tips really in the toolkit is about getting things written down, to make formal requests, put your requests in writing. If you go to, say, a meeting with your GP and they won't refer you on, say, to a CMHT, a community mental health team, then, write to them, put it in writing, the request, because then they have to reply to you and give their reasons why they're not. And then you can challenge those reasons. But if you don't have the paper trail, if you don't have a formal answer, it's difficult to challenge decisions, because he said, she said, becomes more, it's less concrete, I suppose. In the worksheet, in the toolkit, there's information about improving access to psychological therapy service and community mental health teams. So that information is in there. Again, it's very simple, uncomplicated. The idea is for you to have the necessary information to access services, to understand the treatment pathway, understand who makes the decisions, where you can get treatment. So that, because information, I mean, it's a glib cliche, isn't it? But information is power. If you are informed, you are empowered, you're in a better position to access treatment. Sometimes things go wrong, things don't work out. You're not, you might not be getting the treatment that you feel or that NICE recommends that you should have. And then you might want to make a complaint, you might want to make a formal complaint. And in the toolkit, there is information about how to complain about NHS services, and there's a worksheet on writing a complaint letter. So for some of you, you might say, well, I don't need that help, I'm perfectly capable of writing a letter, and that's great. But for some people, it's daunting. We don't write letters very much anymore, it's all emails, isn't it? And to have some guidance on how you might go about writing a formal complaint letter will be helpful for some of you. And there are lots of tried and tested top tips. So just wanted to take you through a very simple scenario. Some of you may already have been through this first step, but this is about accessing treatment for the first time, or where you've been out of treatment for a time and you want to go back into treatment. And it's looking at how you go about that. So this is a diagrammatical. There's a picture of adult treatment pathways, and as you can see, it's fairly complicated. Is there anybody in the audience who isn't from England? Where are you from? You're from Italy. Oh, well, I probably can't help with treatment pathways in Italy, but okay. Anybody? Oh, okay. Right, well, in England, I don't really know. Assuming you're going to be looking to access treatment in England. So the treatment pathway is to your GP, or in England, you can, not for all services, but for the vast majority of cases, you can self-refer to what's called improving access to psychological therapies. And that's the service that provides a range of therapies, one of which is CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy that's recommended by NICE. So if you're starting treatment, they may well be your first steps, either the GP or going to IAPP services. So looking at how you might make a plan, so you're sitting at home, you want to access treatment, how might you go about it? So you'd look at the worksheet, making a plan. So what is the issue? What would you like to change? What's your goal? What result would you like to achieve? With the information you need, the support you might need, who's the decision maker, so who's going to make the referral, and then detailing what you're going to do, the steps you're going to take. So I'm going to call, meet with, write to, and I'm going to do it by this date. And if the person doesn't resolve the situation, what's the next step? What's plan B? What will you try next? And then thinking about the documentation that you might need. And what will you do if the strategy doesn't work? What is the backup plan? So it's trying to break it down so that you have a bit of a strategy. So you're taking control of accessing treatment for yourself. So this is the kind of example of the sort of plan that you might make. So what's the issue? My OCD. And what's my goal? To access treatment. How will I get it? I'll go to the GP, or I might be able to self-refer to the IAPP service. And what information will I take? Well, you could take OCD Action's GP card, which has information about OCD on it. Or you could take the NICE guidance. And that explains for your GP what they need to be doing and what treatment is recommended and where you need to get to in terms of somebody who can provide CBT for you. Easy so far? Okay.
Just ask a question. Unfortunately, I've been through a bit of this myself too, although not including IAPP. But I noticed that the sequences you show, one is visit your GP, and then if community member doing something more IAPP. But then it doesn't show an ability for IAPP to refer you on to the National Specialist Service, only the CMHT. Is that definitely the case?
Yes.
So in effect, you're better off going to the CMHT, who can then refer you on if appropriate.
Well, it depends what you want ultimately. I mean, if we can carry on, we'll kind of do the next step and come back to that, if that's okay. Oh, right. Asking about the diagram in the toolkit shows that it's the CMHT that would refer you on to a national and specialist service, not an IAPP service. So are you better off going to the CMHT that can then refer you on to a national and specialist service? So what I'm suggesting is that we carry on to the next scenario and things might become clearer, if that's okay. And then we'll have questions a bit at the end, if that's all right. Thank you. So we just wanted to talk about prepare, and this is just, in a way, these are kind of examples, and the idea is that this information is transferable to any meeting or any appointment that you would have. So if you're going to meet with your GP, so it's about devising a strategy, again, looking at the outcomes that you want, using the advocacy planning tool pages and the worksheets. So you're clear who you're going to see. Often going to meetings with people, it's often really useful to write down what it is that you want to say and what you want to get across and what information you want from the person that you're meeting with. Yeah? So who's the GP? Have you seen them before? Have they been helpful? And the thing to remember with GPs is that if you're with a group practice, you might be registered with one GP in that group practice, but you don't have to see them. You can see anybody. You can see every GP in the practice. And if you see a GP and they're not very helpful or don't seem to understand about OCD, try another one. Try all of them. Keep going until you find somebody who does understand and who will help. So be honest about your symptoms and how they affect you and those around you. Often people talk to us about, I went to the GP, I talked about my OCD, but they didn't really seem to understand it. Because, and sometimes that's the GP, but sometimes it's because people are going to the GP and only talking about their rituals, say. They're not talking about their intrusive thoughts. So they're not really getting across to the GP the severity, what has brought them to the GP on that particular occasion. And it's really important that you are as honest as you can be with your GP in order that they can make the decision about the right sort of treatment for you. And in the toolkit, there is a worksheet on symptoms. So there's information about describing your symptoms, and there is a worksheet on listing your symptoms. You might take someone with you for moral support. It could be quite daunting disclosing your OCD even to a GP. Have a think before you go about medication. Have you, would you consider medication, or is that an absolute no-no? To have thought about these things before you go is helpful. As I said about the GP, you can change to a different GP if the one you've seen you don't feel has heard you. Take the GP card and use the worksheets in the toolkit. So you've got a plan, you've got the information, you know who the decision maker is, you know what you're going to ask them and what you're going to tell them and what you want to get out of the appointment. So that in a nutshell is what the toolkit's all about, is arming you, if you like, for meetings so that you can get out of them what it is that you want. So looking now at an alternative scenario. So you're in treatment, perhaps, but it's not working. Now, obviously, there are lots of different reasons, can be lots of different reasons why treatment isn't working. It could be that what you're receiving is not CBT. It could be that the particular therapist is not the right one for you. Because obviously, in order for therapy to work, you have to be able to trust the therapist. And we're human beings, and relationships vary depending on who you're with. And it may be that this is not the right therapist for you. It might be that you can't manage the homework and the CBT is too challenging. It might be that it's not the right time for you. There might be other stuff going on in your life that is triggering your OCD, and the CBT at this point is not going to be effective. So it's all, looking at all those kind of things really, and looking at realistically what might help, and again planning. So looking back at the treatment pathways and what the steps might be. So in the first, we were going to give people the worksheet to do, but we haven't got it, have we?
Worksheets in the book.
Worksheets in the book. Do you want to just take a couple of minutes, just look at the worksheet and have a think then? So we're talking about a scenario where you're in treatment, and that might be with IAPP or it might be with the CMHT. So have a look at the planning worksheet. What might you do? How might you go about this? So we're just thinking about planning now. Have you all got the right page? So it's the... Huh? So it's this worksheet one. Worksheet one. Yes, absolutely, yeah. So just have a look at that. Just spend a couple of minutes just having a look. So any thoughts about how we might plan for such a scenario? So what's the issue in this scenario? Where were we? So you're in treatment, but it's not working. So what's the issue? You're in treatment and it's not working. So what's your goal? What would you like to have happen? Yeah, that you'd have treatment that would be effective. Yeah, absolutely. So how might you go about that? Who? Yeah? Okay, absolutely, yeah. So, treatment is not working. Your goal is to improve the treatment, or it might be to change the therapist. Who's the decision maker? In the first instance, it would be the therapist. If you're in therapy and it's not working, your first step really is to talk to the therapist. You know, I've been coming for weeks, this isn't working. The information that you might take, for example, would be the OCD Action CBT checklist, which explains what CBT should be. Because it might be that what you're getting is not actually CBT. Often we talk to people and they're having CBT but they're not doing any exposure work. Well, if you're not having exposure work, it's not going to be challenging your OCD, and it's possible that it's not going to be effective, if not definitely not going to be effective. And it may be that your CBT therapist, who's a very experienced CBT therapist, has not actually ever worked with anybody with OCD. As you know, CBT is something that's used for depression and anxiety very broadly, and not necessarily always for OCD. So, it may be that. It may be that.
Is there a list of registered OCD practitioners?
There is on. Well, there is the BABCP website. So the British Association of Behavioural and Cognitive Psychotherapists. But not all CBT therapists are registered there. And even still, you'd need to meet with them and talk to them, really. But, you know, assuming you're getting this on the NHS, I mean, the first port of call really is to try and improve things, perhaps where you are, and to try and get the therapist to improve, tweak, change their practice. You might find that the treatment is not working, and you've tried all that, and what you really need is to be stepped up. What you really want is specialist OCD treatment. And I think in a way that kind of answers your question. It's unlikely that you will get to a national specialist service unless you have had treatment locally. So although the national specialist, obviously it's a specialist OCD service, it's unlikely that you will get the funding, and it's unlikely that the CMHT will refer you if you haven't had treatment locally, you haven't tried treatment locally. And for the vast majority of people, local treatment will be enough to help them manage their OCD. Sometimes not, but for the vast majority of people it will be. So you're not necessarily going to need to go to a national specialist service. In order to get a referral to a national specialist service, the CMHT needs to remain involved. So those services won't accept a referral without the CMHT involvement. So again, sorry. Yes. Well, again, going back to this diagram, I suppose, although it's slightly better, I think in the toolkit, because IAPP services are at the same level as GP services, so they're primary services, and then the CMHT is the next step. So it's unlikely, unless you're discharged by the CMHT, that you can go back to IAPP, if you see what I mean. So often what happens is that people are perhaps referred from the GP to IAPP services and get CBT, and perhaps that's not doesn't work particularly well. People remain unwell, and then they're referred back to the GP, and then the GP will refer them to the CMHT. So that's kind of how those two services work. And obviously, if you're seeing a psychiatrist and that's considered treatment, but you're not getting CBT, then the thing to do is to take the NICE guidance, because that's what it says in the guidance, is that you should be having CBT with ERP and or medication. And so the psychiatrist might be prescribing medication, but it won't be CBT. Yes. Yeah. So, absolutely. A lot of IAPP services, for example, are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and people can't leave their house to access it. But service providers have to comply with the Equality Act, and so they have to make reasonable adjustments. And that could well involve treatment at home, or treatment via Skype, or treatment on the telephone. Sessions in the afternoon, because mornings are difficult because of rituals. So yes, you're perfectly within your rights to ask that, and they certainly need to be making it possible for you to do that. So that sort of gives you an overview of how you might use the toolkit. General top tips. To be persistent. Unfortunately, it's becoming harder and harder to access good quality treatment for OCD. It is possible, and it is, I know, a tall order when you're struggling already with your OCD, then to have to struggle with limited, rationed mental health services. But you are going to have to be persistent, but be polite. Put requests for treatment or changes in writing. If you're not happy with something, then raise it with the person that you're not happy with in the first instance. Try and resolve things locally. So if you're not happy with the therapist, try and raise things with the therapist. By all means, take somebody with you, or put it in writing, your concerns to the therapist. So you've got a paper trail. Similarly with a psychiatrist, if you're not happy with a psychiatrist, they're just giving you medication and what you want is CBT, and you go to a meeting with the psychiatrist and you request it and they say there's no money for it, we're not going to provide it. Put the request in writing. Make reference to the NICE guidelines on treatment. And although these are guidance, this is guidance only, so it doesn't have any kind of statutory clout. Services do not have to follow it. But it's best practice, and if they don't follow it, they should be telling you why they have decided not to. And again, it'd be useful to have that in writing, their reasons for not complying with the NICE guidance. Always ask for the names, roles, organisations of the people who ring you, you speak to, you meet with, so that you know who it is that you're talking to. And ask for timescales. You know, you meet with your psychiatrist or you meet with the GP and they say, yes, fine, I'll refer you to IAPP. When are they going to refer you? How will you know? Can you have a copy of the referral letter? What are the waiting times for IAPP services? Yeah, so you've got that information, so you've got some control over your situation. And if things don't go well, so you've tried to resolve things locally with your therapist, with your GP, with the CMHT, or with the psychiatrist, then escalate things. Everybody's got a line manager. It's a hierarchical structure, the NHS. Use it. You go up to the next step, their boss, and if you don't like what they say, then their boss. Yeah, and you're persistent, and put it in writing. And if you don't get the results that you want, and you're not happy, then you can complain. You have a right to complain. People are often very reluctant to put a complaint in writing. They're concerned that they will be treated poorly as a result. You have an absolute right to complain. It's a way for services to review their practice. It's a learning tool for them. You can get support to make complaints. There's lots of information, as I said, in the toolkit about the complaint processes, but you can also use the patient advice and liaison service. Every NHS trust has one. They're not independent, they're part of the trust, but they can help you make complaints. Or you might have a local mental health advocacy service. You can use those. The helpline, our helpline, can guide you to your trust's website and the complaints process on the website. Or you can contact us. And we can complain on your behalf, or we can write to services on your behalf. So the toolkit is a work in progress. This is a draft, really, just looking at accessing treatment. What we really want is for you to use it and to tell us what you think of it. You should have a back sheet that is a feedback form. It'd be really good to know what you think of it, what you would like added to it. Our aim is to have information in it about the Equality Act in the next month or so. But if there are other things that you think would be useful for us to have information on in it, or tools, let us know. Because we want it to be useful. We want you to be able to use it and to get something out of it. Has anybody got any questions? Do you want to answer the...
Yes, we'll get some mics.
Mics,
Yeah.
okay. Whoa.
Sorry, everybody.
That's right. We are very awake now.
It's horrible.
Yeah, so about a year ago or so, actually back in 2016, I went through the standard procedure of first going to a GP and explaining the problem with my OCD, and then shortly then being referred to I think within the county of Oxfordshire, I believe the actual county-wide mental health team. And I then was given there was a lot of lead time between different appointments which I had with the therapist. And I did feel that they were that I was being dotted around in one sense, and that for example, from one appointment to another, I was referred to a different person whom I then had to explain the whole thing again. So every time I went to them, it was sort of like a square one thing. And the other thing was that I had, is that they relied far too much, it seemed, on because they use these, like the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. Which I don't think, I mean, I know that this is a whole other discussion itself, but in some aspects, I don't think that if they use that as a criteria, it's not the best to assess the impact of OCD. And as a result of that, because I ultimately, I mean, I don't want to be too critical, but I think it was far too emphasised on depression in general. I was then discharged because it was like I wasn't really
depressed enough.
I wanted more specific help. But I think that the way that it was dealt with, and the fact that there was a lack of communication, or almost a bit of Chinese whispers, that I had to re-explain things, that I feel that I probably should not necessarily complain to them, or at least try and say this is what happened, or try and backtrack my experiences and say, for people suffering with OCD, and I think in general, this could have been dealt with better. So I'm really glad, it's not really a question, it's more that I'm really glad that we've got sort of there is a plan to be able to complain, because I think that if there is inherently a problem, and I ended up going away, that they're in the dark as to why nothing was changed.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, great, thank you. I mean, I think that, and I was smiling to Hannah actually, because Hannah did some research for us last year around IAPP services, and they were using, and still unfortunately predominantly use the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7.
Exactly, and like you were saying, that's not really appropriate for OCD, because if someone is engaging in their compulsions to sort of appease their anxiety, then of course their anxiety is going to be, at a better level, so to speak. So it's not really telling much about someone's OCD. So I completely agree with you, and I myself was quite critical in the overuse of them. So hopefully that'll get better. Leave it with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they ought to be using specific OCD severity scales. Because also, if you're going to start in treatment, how do they measure progress if they're not using an OCD specific tool? And that's that's what we've been pushing, certainly for IAPP services, to be using. And absolutely, the point you raise about complaints, it's an opportunity to give feedback on your experience. Yeah.
Hi, considering all those issues that gentleman talked about with those issues, what are your thoughts on accessing private treatment?
My thoughts?
Or just any information, because this is all NHS, right?
It is. And we would, the reality is that NICE recommends treatment, and treatment is available on the NHS, and I think, we believe that you ought to be able to access it. Having said that, we do acknowledge that because of waiting times and the difficulty often, that people do go down the private route. And obviously that's your choice.
There is some very, very good treatment out there. It's just obviously in advocacy we don't hear the good stories, we hear all of the bad things. But there are many people that you'll speak to and they said they had treatment on the NHS and it was brilliant and it worked fantastically for them. It is a very, very individual thing, and it may just be kind of a case of bad luck that you went to a particular GP or a particular psychiatrist or whatever it was, and unfortunately perhaps they didn't know exactly what they were doing. But I think for me personally, I had treatment in NHS. It worked brilliantly for me, and it is just to find that person, and it is, as we say, about perseverance. Please don't give up. If you go to a GP and they're not helpful, go to every single GP in that surgery. If you need to leave your GP surgery, please do that. Don't feel that you have to stay just because if you don't stay with that GP, you're not going to get treatment. Go to every GP that you can and say, these are the problems that I have, this is the support I need, this is how I want you to help me, and don't be afraid to do that, and keep pushing. And if you are receiving treatment, you think that it's not right, go somewhere else, look somewhere else, you know, please come to us. You know, there's lots of information on our websites and other websites as well, and it is just to keep trying until you find something that does work for you, so please don't give up with that.
Can I just say too, if you do decide to go down the private route, I mean, you know, you really are then a customer and to shop around. And if you look, you know, if you're looking for a CBT therapist and you go to the BABCP website, you know, go and interview them really. So you make an appointment and you ask them what's their experience of treating OCD, how successful have they been, how will they treat you, and get a sense of whether this is somebody that you can work with. Because private CBT is often very expensive, and you want to make sure that if you are having to spend the money, that you're getting the good stuff, as it were. Yeah?
Yeah, hi. You mentioned the documents, the OCD Action GP card and CBT checklist and NICE guidance sheet. Are they all available here, do you know?
We've got, on the OCD stand, we've got the GP card and we've got the CBT checklist. NICE guidance needs to be downloaded. They don't produce this. This is old. They don't produce this anymore, so you'd have to download it from either NICE or it's on the OCD Action website.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi. It's more of a general question really for the more longitudinal issues. I think certainly from a lot of, I was a trustee of a mental health charity for a while, and some of our clients commented that especially when they're accessing things like IAPP services, and kind of as a couple of people have mentioned, it's easy to get stuck not just in the loop that you mentioned, but also a loop where you end up referred out to a service, have X amount of sessions that are structured by the NHS, have a progression point and say you have achieved X amount of points better, well done. You're then back. The problem is then longitudinal, you're likely to relapse. And especially then as the older you are or the longer you have the illness, the harder it gets to then continue on doing that. And sometimes I think as well from county to county can be quite difficult because the threshold for CMHT can be quite high depending on demand. Mm-hmm. And it's somewhat of a postcode lottery as how easily you get access to CMHT services. So I suppose what I'm kind of wondering from you guys is, do you have any advice to those that are perhaps in that longer term cycle of treatment and relapse, because 12 sessions isn't enough? How do they break that without necessarily having to pay privately? Is there a way around that? Is there some advice you could give to those people, or what sort of thing would you look to help people with that?
Do you want to answer that?
Firstly, don't give up. Keep going. So there are, you know, for example, CCGs where you will go to and they'll say you can only have 3 sessions, even we've heard of, which isn't true. So for those of you here with OCD who have had treatment, you will know it takes time to kind of build a rapport with your therapist. It really takes time to kind of get into the swing of doing ERP and exposure and CBT. So we say kind of a minimum of 12, minimum. Definitely should be more than that, and if it's deemed that you need more, they should be providing more. Please don't be afraid to ask for more. Again, there are NICE guidelines which stipulate how long you should be having therapy for, how long it should be. We do also have information in our CBT card about what good CBT should be. So in terms of getting kind of stuck, don't be afraid to ask. Say to the psychiatrist, this is not working for me. Is there someone else I can see? Do you have a supervisor? I want to know exactly what you're going to do for my treatment to move me forward. And if you feel you aren't moving forward, please complain. Please do that.
Are you still doing that low, medium and high intensity model?
Yes.
You know, right.
Yeah.
What's the difference in treatment like sessions between each level?
Well, within IAPP, services. So there are 2 levels of therapists, aren't there? There's the PWP, which is I can never remember what PWP stands for.
A psychological well-being,
Well-being practitioner. Yes, there we go. Psychological well-being practitioner, which is the lower level for the mild to moderate, severity of condition. And that tends to be guided self-help and support groups, your group CBT. What you're really after is the high-intensity IAPP therapists.
For moderate to severe.
And they're people who are BABCP accredited therapists. And so they're the ones that you want to be getting treatment from. Rochelle's absolutely right in terms of nice guidance, in terms of the number of sessions. The other thing which we haven't talked about, which we need to flag up really, is if you aren't under a CMHT and you have been to IAPT perhaps a number of times and you've had a number of courses of CBT, something to consider is patient choice. And this is where, for those people who are not under the care of a CMHT, you have the right now to choose an outpatient consultant-led mental health service of your choice in England. So you could go anywhere in England. So you could choose the CMHT, or you could go somewhere like the Centre for Anxiety Disorder and Trauma at South London and Maudsley, and you could be living in Hull and make that choice. I mean, it's quite a trek travelling down for outpatient appointments at the Centre for Anxiety Disorder and Trauma, but that might be something worth considering.
Can I just ask, sorry, how many of you have actually heard of patient choice before? How many of you knew that you could do that? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, I mean, in theory it shouldn't be, because you could use your patient choice to choose an IAPT service. Yes. Well, it's the GP that makes the referral, so you have to convince the GP.
If your GP perhaps is saying that their arrangement through their clinical commissioning group
Yeah.
that dictates the funding for the area in which your GP works
Yes.
is such that their pathway is to send you to the CMHT,
Yeah.
to the mental health team,
Yes.
and they say it's not normal at this stage that we will do that.
Yes.
One's only backstop is to say, if I've had treatment before and it's not been effective, that I'm a returning patient and that I wish to be given the right to patient choice, and I'd be grateful if you could refer me. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And we have information from NHS Innovations on our website about choice. And if you find that your GP is reluctant to refer you and respect your right to choose, which is enshrined in law, it's not it's not a preference or a good practice thing, it is your legal right, then come to us. And we can put you in touch with NHS Innovations, the choice person there.
Sorry, I asked a question.
That's right. I think it's really important. Unfortunately, both GPs and CCGs, which are the commissioners, the ones that pay the money for the services, are still, despite the fact that it came out in 2014, are still fairly ignorant about patient choice.
We've got this gentleman, lady in blue, and then at the front, and then we might have to do a time check.
I just want to make a couple of observations really, and then make a request. My experience is that sometimes this can be down to luck. I'd been referred to a group psychotherapy, a CBT in group form, and I was late by about 40 minutes, and the therapist said, "Are you all right, Mike? Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, I've been cycling round the roundabout in the middle of Chichester for 40 minutes. She said, "What are you doing that for?" And I said, "Well, if I don't go over the specific mark in the road, my sister will die." And she said, "I think we better talk about this afterwards." And that's how I got into, and I was lucky, I got CBT, ERP and schema,
Wow.
all just from that bit of luck. And the other thing I would say is that I also ended up 3 or 4 years ago making a complaint against a mental health nurse that was in charge of my case, And like you say, I was worried sick about being bullied or put at a disadvantage, and the absolute opposite happened, and I got the senior nurse in charge of my case, who was fantastic. And the request is that in my day job I work for Recovery Focus, and this is just absolutely excellent. I'm wondering whether I please may share it with my team members, because I'm sure they could use it in...
Please do.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course, absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you.
Just ask you something.
Yeah.
You referred to the fact that you've got CBT, ERP, and something else.
Schema, yeah.
Sorry, what was the other?
Schema.
Schema, what is that?
It's basically its theory is that it's no good looking at why you do things if you don't look at your core beliefs, and the theory is that we all have core beliefs about both ourselves and the world, and if they are faulty they will drive our OCD. And so by looking at those, to put it in easy terms, my biggest core belief is I don't trust myself, so therefore my OCD plays havoc with trust issues. So am I going to sign off a letter with Dr. Ridley is the C word, you know, things like this. And so I had to learn to trust myself, but actually I'm not going to do that. So it was really quite important to me that I had that schema element, because if I was looking at what was driving it, it wouldn't, and it's proved its point. I mean, it's 12 years since I had the treatment now, and it's really worked.
I've not come across that.
Yeah. It's
Is
not,
it an acronym for something?
no, it's actually the term. It's called schema. I'm not an expert in it, I just was on the end of it, but it's called schema therapy. Yeah. And I got all three of them, which is lucky.
Great. Probably just time for one more question. You don't want to miss your tea break. Yes.
Hi there. So my brother has severe OCD and has done for 15 years. He lives in Devon, and I was really interested to hear about patient choice, because he hasn't had CBT for probably 8 years. Who pays for, if you are referred out of area, who will pay for that? Because Devon doesn't have any money. So.
Well, the reality, nobody has
Nowhere
any
has
money.
any money.
There is no money.
Not just Devon.
They don't have any psychologists either. So there's no
But
therapists.
the CCG funds it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've only got one copy, unfortunately. I should have brought more. But this is the information from NHS Improvements on Patient Choice, if you wanted to take it away, one of you. All right. Thank you very much for coming. Just to give a quick 2-slide oversight of the Advocacy Service. So this is us. We provide both individual advocacy, UK-wide, so telephone, email service, with some face-to-face advocacy in England. So there's 3 of us, and we have a team of volunteers, and we're always looking for more volunteers. So if anybody's interested in becoming an advocate, please talk to us. We also do some national advocacy to try and improve life for people with OCD across the country. The model we only work with people over 18 who have a diagnosis of OCD, BDD. We don't need letters from your psychiatrist. You tell us you've got OCD or BDD, we work on with that. And you need to have a specific issue that's directly related to your OCD or BDD. So about 60 to 70% of the work that we do is around supporting people to access treatment, but we also get involved in things like housing, employment for people who are at universities that are having issues because of their OCD. We will pretty much take on anything, won't we? The advocacy that we provide is short-term and it's issue-based, so we can't be your live-in advocate with every aspect of your life, but we can work on specific issues with you. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy your tea.
Thank you.